The culture that I grew up in was a culture of very poor, violent Jews. What the real fear was the fear of language. I mean, that to me was profoundly disturbing, because the real poverty of where I grew up, which was very, very poor, was a poverty of language. And that terrified me, that I didn't have the words that I wanted to use. I didn't know them. I didn't know what to do. And that became the sort of the central journey of my life, is to really find the language, to trap it like a hunter. And that's what I've tried to do. Language was always a weapon. It's still a weapon now. You defeat, you win through language. Even as a child, I can't tell you why, I always wanted to live in Paris. That's what I wanted to do. Not because of the culture, but there was something about it that was very, very soothing for me. So at some point, I simply sort of, almost in a violent way, uprooted everything, friendships, love affairs, etc., and just moved to Paris full time. There's something about European culture that moves me a great deal. There's a sense of the past that I don't feel here, and when I walk on a certain street called the Rue Saint-Dominique, and it curves around the Eiffel Tower, I'm always smiling. It's not because of the Eiffel Tower, it's because of the irregularity of the streets. It is profoundly, comforting to be in a culture that doesn't exist on a grid or in a straight line. He has a voice. I mean, I gave him a voice. I thought it was very important that he sing. I wanted to give him a kind of rhythm that when you read his letters, there is no rhythm at all, except there are a few moments. I mean, and these I took right from actual events. There was going to be a mutiny in the early 80s. His officers wanted to leave, to depart from the army, and Washington appeared in front of them, even though he wasn't supposed to appear. And he did nothing but put on glasses, and they didn't realize that he was going blind. As a soldier, he could barely see anymore. And when they saw his shaking hands and his putting on the eyeglasses, they all began to weep. And of course, the mutiny was over. Now, you can say he stage managed it. I mean, maybe he did, but there was something very, very powerful about him. And his silence was a kind of voice, and it was the silence I recalled from my own childhood. But we did not abandon him. We scuttled behind the commander-in-chief, some of us still clutching our wine glasses. His lifeguard had assembled while half the populace of Manhattan stood outside Black Sam's like startled, shivering birds. Children reached out to touch him, their mothers all agog, but he was still too torn with emotion to deliver even the faintest of smiles. I stood beside him now, saw the spasms in his cheek, the measured man who was suddenly at the very border of control. He stopped. I thought he would swoon, but he whispered in my ear as I clutched his hand, "Johnny, where the devil am I?" "In Manhattan, Excellency, near Whitehall." He was a farmer returning to his farm. Perhaps I espied the end of a certain possibility, of boldness itself, a life without his redhead, without Gert. "Child, will you walk with me a while?" We proceeded to Whitehall Slip, where a barge was waiting, all decked with garlands like some floating arbor. But I lost the clasp of his hand as we approached the barge. His lifeguard had bumped me out of the way. They helped him aboard, and while a gaggle of men, women, and children mobbed the ferry slip, I wept like a little boy. I feared I would not see him again as I watched the children wave goodbye to the commander-in-chief, most of them clutching garlands. But his eyes and theirs never did meet. "Adieu," shouted several of his officers who did not accompany him. But he was far away in some territory inside himself, dreaming of his redhead, I'd like to imagine. The barge pulled away from Whitehall the moment he was seated and vanished into the mist, though we could still hear the crash of oars for a very long time.
Thank you.
Thank you.